Hello and welcome to Deep Dives with New Perspectives. Hello, Merrylin. How are you doing?
I'm great, Michael, and you certainly have a new perspective in your in your appearance today.
Whatever could you mean?
Were
It's
you?
interesting. I remember being, I went to UC Santa Cruz for college, and I remember I went to one of my sociology classes, talked about, I forget the people that are kind of outside of the normal realms of society, meaning there are certain classes of people where it's okay to approach them and make comments, whereas normally it isn't. So like one of them is pregnancy, another one is tattoos, special needs, an animal, and then doing things like this. There's a way that it invites people to respond. And as we were talking a little bit earlier, like I'm kind of struck with how many people get a real kick out of it, and then how many people just completely don't notice it or don't say anything about it.
Well, I think, you know, compared to the time when you were in college, I think that oddities are more common today, or at least throughout, more recent times that people just kind of look at them as an individual expression.
It's very Aquarian, right?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of January 6th last year with some of the attire of some of those protesters. You know, well, there's a kind of a Halloween. It's very scorpionic in a way because I said it's a kind of a Halloween display, and what flashed immediately was, yeah, Halloween happens in October, and with the sign that is being emphasized by the sun is in Scorpio, and the last degree of Scorpio, which isn't in October, it's usually in November, when the sun is at that degree, is the Halloween gesture, making comments, and so there is something, it's sort of like if it's scorpionic, it's sort of like trying to express something deeper in your psyche. And that you often, not all the time that I've known you, and even probably in the past year, you've had times where you didn't have a beard. I don't know, maybe at least last year there were a couple of times. And so there's something that to me it represents, in terms of what I know about you, that even though in common talks about, oh, the psychology behind men and their beards is, what are they hiding, kind of thing. I mean, I've heard that many times.
Right.
But with you, it's sort of like you go, if indeed it has anything to do about hiding something, there's another thing I want to say about that, but there's a part of you that wants to come out about those things that are usually not discernible in your appearance, about your conversation. And the other thing about men and beards, that might have fit certain generations, but I think that in more recent decades, it's been more a statement of freedom to not have to engage in certain physical things about the way we look. It's sort of like women in Europe, I don't know if this is still true today, often didn't shave under their arms
or their legs.
It's like a part of nature, going back to nature as a part, allowing nature to come out. And for some men, it's sort of like it gives them a distinction of recognition that relates to former times. And so there's all these variations on it, but I definitely think that it's a part of you that wants others to explore.
Well, it's funny, like when I started first growing my beard, my Danish sister said it gave me gravitas. And I think in a way, the hard part for me with my Sag rising is I have a little bit of a puer type of an energy about me. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, you can't possibly know what you're talking about because you're not old enough. So the beard kind of helped with that a little bit. But now I'm thinking, like, I see all my friends with these wonderful flashes of color in their hair, and I'm thinking, like, hello, why not have some fun with it? Like, you said earlier, it grows out. So what difference does it make? It is an aspect of self-expression. And right now we're really covering a lot of it. I think for me too, I've got my Neptune in Scorpio opposing Jupiter in Taurus. And so this also, I think, represents very much, and I'm Sag rising. So I think it's an interesting kind of combination of those three signs, of expressing things and saying things. And also, yeah, I mean, I kind of want to be around people at this point in my life who want to talk about different things. I'm not, I don't want to talk about surface dwelling, like, oh, the weather. Yeah, it's really pretty outside today. Yeah, it is. We'd all see that.
I want to punctuate the Capricorn in you with this. Hair is a Capricorn or a Saturnian issue. And you have your Mercury and Venus, I believe, in Capricorn. So there is this kind of wanting to draw attention to the kinds of truths that you want to speak about in a very honest way.
Right. And there's also, I think for me, with having my Sag rising, there's also this part of me that really gets a kick out of people. Like when I was younger, I had a few friends who called me Twinkie, which is kind of a gay term about kind of young and dumb, kind of, not very bright. And I always thought, fine, I really like people who underestimate me. Because this is like, someone can look at this or look at my tattoos and like have an assumption, right? Especially, I know like my parents' generation, my mom abhors tattoos, but it's like, this is my body and my expression. And, part of it is for me is like learning what that means. What is the sacred and the profane? I think that's like my Jupiter Neptune opposition from Scorpio to Taurus, the sacred and the profane, and we're living, what is it that's really profane? And why do we make it profane? Because we're uncomfortable with it.
Yeah. You're reminding me of something that Carolyn Casey? No, somewhat. Maybe that was her name, Carolyn Casey. No, Carolyn Casey's an astrologer, right?
I think so, yeah.
And I'm thinking of somebody else whose name is similar, who's written many books about the chakras and whatnot. Her name is passing by. But I remember listening to a recording of a talk she gave in which she told about an encounter she had with several young people. I think they were teenagers, but I'm not positive, who were covered with tattoos. And she ran into them at a gas station cafe, grabbing something on a long road trip she was on. And just started a conversation with them about, would you like to know about what's a possible psychology behind your tattoos? And basically she recounted to them about how in some cultures in ancient times, part of the tattooing process was a way to open themselves to spirit, to gather, information from spirit and guidance from spirit.
Because it so alters you. The writing of that, it's an amazing level of sensation. I remember when I got my first one and there was a point where she had me turned around and I was looking in a mirror and I wasn't feeling this, but I looked at my face and I looked like I was in a lot of pain, but I didn't feel that in my body. It was very altered in a way, but it was like when I saw my face, like, oh yeah, I'm in pain. And it's like, because it was like right on the inside of my arm for the part of the dragon, which is a really sensitive spot.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, and the body never lies, but it's like, but if you bring the mind to it, it's interesting what it reminds me of. Here we're kind of jumping around to interesting stories, but I worked for a dentist in Santa Cruz back in the day, and one of our clients was a really well-known new age pianist, and he came in and he had 4 crowns done, and he did it all without Novocaine and all without any kind of an intervention. He just sat there and said, what you have to do is keep present to it. This is like the idea of like pain is a sensation that requires your absolute attention, right? Here's this, I mean, I guess we're still in Scorpio territory, right?
Well, I don't know so much about Scorpio territory here, because I do have something to say about this, but if you
but I was just so touched with this idea of like, and it's true whenever, I think women understand this even more, especially women who have given birth, that there are certain points where the body releases other endorphins and other hormones and things that help counteract the high amount of sensation going on in the body, like an amputation of a limb, so things along those lines. When you think about those war, pre-Civil War and even the Civil War, where people were just like left and right getting things amputated right there, no morphine, no nothing, just like slicing through if they were lucky, if they had some whiskey nearby.
Well, usually they bit into some heavy duty object like a leather strap or a blade or something, or whatever, just to
silence the scream.
Movies. But what's interesting in terms of this whole tattooing issue is that our skin is represented by Capricorn or Saturn. It's part of it contains our structure. And then what tattooing uses needles, which are Martian or Aries. But in some ways it's Martian and Scorpio, because you're piercing into the body, and to get through the structure of the body to the spirit of the body. And often people choose tattoos to say something about their spirit. This is broadly spoken.
They work for me.
Yeah. So there is this kind of
but for some people,
astrology is basically just a mapping system.
Right.
And it's a kind of a universal mapping system. So do you know enough? I don't know that much about medical astrology, and there aren't very many astrologers who do, and only not even a handful have written about it. So, there's volumes to be said, but I think to do that well, one would need to go and study medicine in depth to really bring out more of the metaphor that's there astrologically.
Right.
There's some things going on this week that I do want to touch upon. One of the big ones is the end of this week on Saturday night at like 10:22 Eastern time. If you're in the East Coast or the country's capital, the planet Pluto will exactly return to the degree and minutes that it was at with the Declaration of Independence. Now, many astrologers, not all, look at the Sibley chart for 5:12 in the afternoon on July 4th, 1776. But even we all just say, that signing happened sometime that day. And in a show that it's already recorded on Moonwise this coming Saturday, on the day of that return, another astrologer, Trish Kennedy, pointed out how, as the sun moves through the zodiac, by the end of that day on July 4th, 1776, the planet Pluto, would have been somewhere in that first quadrant of the chart. That's the first, second, or third house. Now, the Sibley chart puts it in the second house. But by the end of that day, it would have, by the end of that day, meaning, after, before midnight even, it would have been in the first house of that chart. So there's something about Pluto that really defines a great deal about this country. And even in that chart, it rules the ninth house. And so, the whole, even though it was the beginning of a declaration that we were a separate country, even though we didn't have a constitution yet. That came a few years later when Pluto had moved into Aquarius, by the way. But still, they were fighting the oppression that they saw. This is Plutonian oppression that they saw from Great Britain, from the king, from the Kingdom of England, um, and yet they were continuing their own version of cruelty to slaves. And so in that whole Revolutionary War, there was, in that Declaration of Independence, there was nothing that they were stating about there will no longer be slavery in this country.
Right.
And that is that signature of Pluto that day and ending that day, I think, is just a very powerful one. And even when you look at that chart and say, well, Pluto rules the 12th house, and the 12th house is all about the things that our minds imprison us with, let alone slavery and external prisons that besides, but
psychological prisons.
yeah, and that we're still dealing with to this day. I mean, it, even though at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century in the whole world, including Europe mostly, psychology started to come into its own. I mean, it wasn't, people knew things about the soul usually from a spiritual perspective, but in terms of having it be an academic discipline, that didn't happen until the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Relatively new, but you'd think after a whole 100 years that our country, and even, I mean, the Americans, I've noticed this over the last 30 or 40 decades, Americans are very slow to acknowledge the benefits of psychology. Very, very slow, which actually reminds me of something I heard today. I was listening before we came on the air. I was listening to Tom Hartman's show, and he's quite the progressive, etc. And one of the things that he mentioned, and he writes these summaries and posts them later in the day. So I'm going to go read what this was, because I just turned it on and picked up on part of it. That one of the things they're finding is certain brain problems, and I'm going to be very generic, because I don't know the specifics, as a result of COVID, and I'm not sure if he was even associating it with some of the vaccines. And that's, I mean, Hartman has been very pro-vaccination and stuff, so he wasn't doing this as a statement against. There's another person I know, Mercola, he's a doctor, he does supplementary stuff. He's very anti-vaccination, and I tried to find something on his site, but I didn't yet. But what struck me about that, and this is going away from Pluto, was that the planetoid Chiron is in Aries, and Aries is representative of our brain. Matter of fact, when you think of the glyph for Aries, that ram butting heads, it's sort of like you think the whole head of the human body is in general represented by Aries, and part of that is the brain, and Chiron seeks to have integration, have wholeness. But often, where it is, it's also pointing out what are some of the issues that are preventing that wholeness. And so I just found that fascinating today to come across that. And Chiron, I think, like right now, is on the 10th degree. It's just ending the first decan of Aries before it goes into the second one, which will be more of a leonine flavor to it. But so there's a Cancer flavor to this, and Cancer having so much to do with our own individuality, etc. And so it kind of emphasizes this is not necessarily a problem for everybody, but we all have brains, but our brains are different. Our physical bodies are different, but I just thought that was an interesting point to look at in terms of paying attention to what gets uncovered more, because even though we're all tired of this virus going rampant, we're all tired of it. The consequences of it are still with us.
And will be for some time.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean. So anyway, those are things that I wanted to definitely share today, because it was like current heavy duty stuff. And of course, talking about destruction and stuff. I mean, the United States is poisoning itself, perhaps with a war with Russia, although Russia's the news today in terms of Ukraine and Russia seems to be like restationing its stuff, kind of backing off a little bit. So there's this very strange game going on. But in terms of it's related to that Pluto in some ways, not necessarily our Pluto, but Pluto in general, in Capricorn, having to do with big structures and how they're rejuvenated or whatnot. And there's been lots of news commentary about how Putin really wants to reestablish the Soviet Union.
And the tie-in with that too is with Pluto in Capricorn, it's opposing Cancer. It's like, defending one's home territory. What is the territory? What is the right thing to do? And, and you can't make me, that kind of energy that happens. And especially with Pluto in Capricorn, we have these individual, Putin's kind of placed himself in this interesting power position, right? In a communist party.
Well, that's kind of interesting, because when you mentioned him though, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't remember the exact dates when Pluto went into Capricorn. Was at the after the turn of the century, but and then of course there of late we've had Trump and Trumpism, and I'm going like, oh yeah, it's sort of like bringing out, and of course this goes to the United States chart, the grifters, the people that take advantage of the money pot. I know Trump is under a lot of heat lately in terms of his financial dealings, and there are many pundits who have talked about how he just found, with the American government and having had his control of it for a term, it's been a way for him to not only garner some of the resources of this country, but also to have some of his children do the same. Just an interest. Not that that's terribly uncommon, but
and now they're even more, commodifying the name even more. There's these chocolate bars they're selling that are wrapped in gold, gold foil to look at like gold bars. And yeah, I mean, he's really taking advantage of his previous position and the social media standing. He's really got quite an amazing loyal following.
So in some ways, this Pluto transit through the second house of the United States chart is showing the abuse of our resources.
Completely.
Yeah. And in some ways, like I was thinking about how he had opened up some of the parts of the national parks to development, and a great deal, I don't know if all of it has been reversed by President Biden, in my opinion, thank God. But still, I mean, there's this kind of, with Pluto, there is this kind of abusive taking away, but there's also this enrichment that can happen. It's one or the other. And I used to look at Pluto transits. I haven't looked from this perspective in a long time, but I'm being reminded of it, that where it's transiting, it's either destroying what was there in some way, and in various levels. Destruction can happen in a whole range of ways, from minor to huge, or it's reinforcing or enriching that area of the chart. And a lot of that has to do where one is psychologically.
Well, I think especially when one's younger or using it like for, I don't know, lower intended things, I think there could be a very much, this power aspect to it. But as one understands, because it's just Pluto's like it's the farthest out there planet as far as how we look at it in astrology. So it's incorporating that into human consciousness is something I think that really takes a long time. And so I think there's a way that it also tempers, because it anneals things, like a jeweler or a swordsmith, like a blacksmith going and beating it out, beating out all the impurities over time. Scorpio, like I like Aaron Sullivan's explanation of Scorpio. It has to get sick and tired of itself. The drama it goes through over and over again, to learn. But that's part of it. It's the hardening and the strengthening, because then later on, when you encounter those emotional experiences with other people, we don't get rocked any longer, right? Because we know those spaces within ourselves. We've been living in them. We're not afraid to walk through the valley of death, and understanding that it's just part of the ongoing cycle of what life does for us. That's my view.
I don't think it's a quick, easy way to get Pluto to be totally enriching and oh yeah, that it's easy to say, oh yeah, that again, but they're still having to go through that again.
Right. But over time, I mean, I don't know. And the other thing for me, my favorite thing with thinking of Pluto is like holding on to something that's radioactive, because I think Pluto teaches us a lot about our attachments to things and our ideas about things. And the more we're attached to them, there's a luxury involved. Pluto is really good at taking away the luxury. So it's like, if it's a luxury for you to believe in this certain thing and you're holding on to it dearly, I figure like, oh, then you lose your fingertips. Oh, you're still holding on to it. Oh, you lose your hands. Oh, you're still holding on to it. You lose your forearms. Pluto will give you a reckoning to the level of your stubbornness around the ways in which you will not surrender. Putting it in lay terms.
Pretty gory.
Or like Tom Brady calls it, Pluto transits the great and terrible simplification. I mean, there's something that happens in it when you're on the one side of it. It's like, oh my God, I would never ever go there. And then when you're on the other side of it, you go like, that wasn't easy. And I'm thankful that is now gone. But again, like you said, it has to do, I think, with a person's consciousness, how much you're wanting to work with those things, and how much you're projecting those onto other people, frankly.
Yeah, but it's not like when you use the word consciousness, it's not like it's all going on within one's mind. It can be the consciousness if it's monetary wise, like the United States, it has to do with the consciousness of how this country allows its resources, i.e. Gold mines, national parks, forests, just to put it in concrete, because this is Capricorn, concrete terms. It's buildings, it's treasury mints, how they actually utilize that and allow other Americans to utilize that. And that comes out in very physical terms, not necessarily emotionally, mental, whatever, so.
It's funny because as you said that, it's the second time it's come to my mind, conscious, like there was a political cartoon that showed like three groups at a table, one who had like all this money, a wealthy person, and then like a middle class person, and then a person of color, and was the thing. And then the person with the wealth said, hey, look at those people over there are trying to steal from you, and just like showing the absurdity of the amount of wealth at the top, and then pitting, people of color against the middle class and vice versa. And it's just, there are those things I think that we're coming to awareness. And Pluto in Capricorn is about, reassessing our structures and reassessing our understandings of our social structures, especially those larger structures like government and things that take care of many, many people. And we've seen an amazing freedom of giving on the side of the government since COVID happened. that shows us there's a possibility of doing things differently than how we've done in the past.
Right. That reminded, of how we might have mentioned this on our Zoom sessions before. How the city of Stockton, California has given people a guaranteed base income of $500. Well, more recently here in New Mexico, certain organizations, Somos un Pueblo Unido, an immigrants' right organization being one of them, with some other organizations, don't remember. I just know that one very well. And but they got money through grants and whatnot to give immigrant families $500 a month guaranteed, to be able to set themselves up and establish, get themselves going here. And and what you brought up in terms of during COVID, during that first year where the government was doing that for a lot of people, it kind of opened our eyes a little bit, or a lot, about the benefits of that kind of economy. And we had a candidate in the Democratic Party in 2020 election, I believe his last name is Wang, who talked about a guaranteed income of $1,000 per person. And I know I wasn't paying much attention to that at that time. I had other preferences in that race, but I certainly would hope that that idea would start to take hold in more cities and in more states around the country, and perhaps the whole country at some point, because what we're seeing, not only with money, and you think about people as a resource for the country, and how many people are not willing to do the jobs that they were doing for various reasons, but I imagine among them was the idea of, I don't want to do that kind of work the rest of my life. I want to do something more meaningful for myself, more satisfying for myself, some things of that sort. And so some people had the wherewithal to even not work for a couple more years to rethink how they're living their lives. And, I think we need to do that on a national level, to rethink how we're living in this country.
I agree. It's gonna be real interesting to see. We got 3 passes of this Pluto return?
Yeah, I didn't really, I believe so, but I didn't look at it ahead, so I don't have that data.
Yep. So we're going to be stewing in this for a little while. It's going to be I think it goes on through September, I want to say, or something. It's something like late summer or early fall. I think it's going to be quite our dominant energy. And I think we've been seeing it, from January 6th last year, the riots and things that have been going on in Paris, the protests that have been going on here in the US. I think we're just going to see a lot more activity, and people, who've had enough. I mean, I don't know if you saw the newspaper the other day, but I mean, they're starting to talk about, the crazy amount of prices here in Santa Fe for housing, which other areas are dealing with as well. So, how can people, I mean, $1,000 a month won't even pay for a place to live.
No.
So, something's going to have to be done to help, to make it possible for all of us to be. It's going to be really, I'm interested. It's not going to be an easy time, but I'm excited and hopeful, cautiously optimistic. How's that?
Cautiously optimistic. Yes, I love that. It's a nice way of looking at things. Well, Michael, good chatting with you today.
Great chatting with you. Hey, people out there, if you're enjoying what we're talking about, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please share with your friends, please leave comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if there's certain topics you want us to discuss, please share those as well.
Yeah, I hope that the next time we're on, your whole beard might be a different shade of.
I'll be 3 weeks away. I get my hair cut every 4 weeks, so nothing will happen for another 3.
Oh, I'm not talking about cutting.
No, the
I'm talking
color.
about coloring.
Yeah, right.
Oh, you had this done by,
Yeah, when I got my hair done, my hairdresser did it. My
okay.
cosmetologist.
I
Yeah.
thought you did it yourself. All right. I understand. I understand now what you're saying. Well, maybe next month.
Maybe next month. Definitely. Stay tuned for changes.
Yeah, when the sun is in Pisces, when anything happens. Yeah. So how can people reach you, Michael?
coremichael.com, coremichael.com. And how can people find you, Merrylin?
Moonwiseastrology.com. So adios for now.
Have a great day. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.